Welcome back. I left the bottle to dry with the modeling paste on it for a couple of days, only because I couldn't get back to it. As we can see, the fiber paste has great adhesion. It has got that flexibility because these are plastic bottles and it's not cracking when I pinch it. And that's not what this will be going through all the time anyways, you'll be pinching it, but that was just to demonstrate how strong and flexible this material is. Now, before I paint it to get that aged look, because I have so many ideas of what I want to do, I got myself some thumbnails ready. And this is a way for me to test the color combinations, see what I do like, what I don't like. Because if I'm trying to get this to be an aged pottery look, I'm not going to go for bright golds and silvers and neon colors. I'm using more neutral tones. And basically what I've been playing with a lot is our tinted gessos. So with this one, as you can see, I started with a light gray or a neutral gray, like in this gesso, and then I put a carbon black on top. It's okay, but it didn't quite give me the feeling I wanted, that aged look. So the next, what I did is I used some of that, the fiber paste that we had already tinted with the Airlight Yellow Deep. I put that down first. Then I put a burnt umber gesso to try to tame it down. And then on top of that, I put a red oxide tint. It is this bottle here. As you can see, it almost from the distance does have that look of copper or bronze, but that's all that is that combination of first a yellow fiber paste ground, gesso, and then some of the red oxide tint. For here is one that I started with black gesso first, and then I did an unbleached titanium, and that is this object here. And I'm quite happy with that. And that's when I realized for me, what works best is to have a dark undertone and then to put your lights on top of that. And then also what I did here, just for a little nuance to make it look through that age time, I put a little of the red oxide color in there. I feel that's successful. And then here in this square, again, I started with a black gesso and then I put a neutral gray on top, and that's how I got the effect for this bottle. I think that is quite successful as well. And as a grouping, they're working together. So let's see how we would do that. I'm going to experiment to see how I want to do this one, because I don't want to do it exactly the same as that if it's going to be in the same collection. So what I have here is a dried square of my fiber paste. I've put out different shades or tints of gray, starting with a neutral gray gesso, one that has a bit more white in it, and then just using a warm white. Let's just cover that surface. Before, what I demonstrated was mixing the color right in with the fiber paste and applying it. And this is the example of if you applied it white first and then you wanted to color it with paints after. So I'm going to start. This one's going to be a bit lighter than the other ones. So I'm going to start with my darkest gray. Just wetting my brush a bit. Might have it a bit too wet. Mentioned that it has that tooth on it, so it doesn't slide across the surface smoothly. It has a bit of resistance, which I like. And I'm going to cover the entire surface, going back and forth, because I don't want that white showing through, because white would make it look more like a porcelain, and we're going for that aged pottery to be more of an earthenware color as a base or a clay. Dip my brush a bit just to make it move a bit more freely. And that wouldn't take long to dry at all. That'll take about 10 minutes, if. And I just want to make sure I haven't put it on too thick. So what I'm going to do is take my brush with a bit of water in it. I'm just going to pull some of that back a bit, because that is the worry that I've lost some of my texture in there. And this one I smoothed out quite a bit. You can see in these ones, I left it more rough in areas of thicker applications of the fiber paste. And this one was quite smooth. I'd smoothed it out a bit. Okay. And while that's drying, I'll just go back in and work through one of these a bit more to see what it'd be like and show you the dried brush technique to use on top of this one. So I'm going to go for my lighter gray second. I'm just going to dry it, and let's see how that works with it. If it would look natural in certain areas. And that's how I'm going to work this surface of the new jar. I'm going to leave some areas quite untouched with color, and I'm going to move my brush in different directions so I don't get stop and start marks. I think those will work well together. Okay. Now I'm going to use a lighter gray on top of this and just do some dry brush areas. It's just one notch up. I might just make it a bit lighter because there's some of that into it. And that's one thing to be aware of. If you're mixing on the fly like I just did, you're gonna have to do that for the whole surface. You might want to mix up little containers of your colors first. There we go. That was dry enough. And I'm barely touching the surface. It does have more of a stone-like effect. I'm liking that combination. I think it does have a natural feel to it. And what I will also do, and I can see, so I'll make sure I have it ready, like a little bit of a highlight on that. So maybe I would do something with the red oxide tint. There's just a few areas that might just have just a few little surprise areas. Okay, now it's time to pick my choice and see what I'm going to do for my actual bottle. Now I'm going to cover this. I made up a deeper base color that I think would be more effective, and I'm going to still use this palette, but I think I need to start a little darker. And I made up a volume so that I wouldn't run out. What I'm going to do is just get my brush just a little damp, and I'm going to cover the entire surface. I'm just going to take As you can see, I'm using 2 lids or anything just to make sure that the bottom surface doesn't scuff up what you're painting on. It allows you to get down and around those edges. I am using Tri-Art's gesso, and if you use gesso straight on, it can be kind of thick. So as I mentioned, diluting with water, but I'm finding I'm diluting it quite a bit. So I'm just having my water ready, and you can see it helps you to fill in those little porous areas much better. And if it's too thick, I had it too thick over here, it just kind of cakes on. And when gesso is put on too thick, depending on the finish, it can have just more of a pudding-like effect, which is not what I'm going for here. So I'm really making sure my brush, I'll put some of the gesso on, and then I'm going to just add some water each time. And it's a fine line. You can see here I'm going too thin, but it might actually make it for an interesting effect if some areas are much more opaque with the gesso, the gray, and then some areas are lighter gray, just washed out with water, faded somewhat. And there we go. We'll let that dry for about 10 minutes. And I'll be ready to put my dry brush in my second coat. While my bottle is drying, I'll talk to you now about the paints that I used. And in fact, I'm actually using the tints in the gesso line of the professional mediums that Tri-Art has. We used to have just a white years ago, and that's the most common that you see, but there's also a clear gesso, there's a black, a brown, a neutral gray, and then a bleached titanium, very natural linen-y look. And that's what I did. I started with my neutral gray, and then I added some of the white gesso to it to get my different stages or shades. That's all I'm using. And I'm using that because it has a nice matte finish, because these do look effective when they're matte. If you don't have gessos to work with, you can use any acrylic paint for this. And If you happen to use an acrylic paint that has a bit more of a sheen to it, I recommend using a matting agent at the top and just coating it. And in this case, I have brought out with me some of the different finishes that we have available in our polymer medium. And what we have is a matte and a semi-gloss in the professional series. You can get a matte, semi-gloss, or a gloss. And there's also Riotech, and it has a really nice matte polymer medium in it. And any of these will work because they've got a bit of a matting agent. They dry clear, but they do have reduced clarity, and they'll take away that sheen. But if I wanted to coat this, I would just pour out my medium. As you can see, it's white. And a lot of mediums, not all of them actually, a lot of mediums are white when they're wet, and they will clarify as they dry. But this is a matte, so it is, as I mentioned, it's going to have reduced clarity because it does have that matting agent in it. And I'm going to use a clean brush, and I'm just going to put on my brush, and I would just finish it. Just like a final finish when it's done. And then it'll have a very unified luster. When it dries, it's all going to be the same matte sheen to it. You don't have to put it on thick. Make sure you just cover all the areas. And the reason I'm picking this one is because I did use the red oxide tint in this, and I did use that yellow, Airlight Yellow Deep, and it was a gloss. Both of those had a gloss finish to them. So it's not as matte as I would like. One way to know if your colors are ready to be painted on is to touch them with acrylics. If they're quite cold, they haven't cured enough. You need to let them dry more because they're still at a stage where if they're just semi-dry, you can put your fingernail in or your brush just might lift it off the surface more. It hasn't had a chance to really cure and to stick to the surface. So I'm going to put that aside for a second still. Now we're going to put on our secondary color. I mixed up, again, using the different gessos, a darker gray, but it's lighter than, it's sort of where we start with the neutral gray, where this was a darker base. And let's see what happens. I'm just gonna do a lot of dry brushing, just like this. Going sideways, upwards and downwards. Am I going to put the same effect all over? I think I'm going to leave some of the shoulder a bit darker. I'm just doing a very light. I might be doing too much of that everywhere. Some more paint out. Leave some areas. Just doing a very rough coverage here. Okay, pretty happy with how the jar turned out, and the beauty of it is to recycle, use some plastic, and to use some store finds here, as in the case of the vase. This now is going to be used for multiple purposes in my home. Keep in mind that although I did these on objects, these exact techniques using the fiber paste and the gessos are what you would use in painting techniques to create grounds or effects within your paintings. So it's just a very versatile medium, but I just chose to use it in sort of an upcycled, fun way today. For more information about these products, please go to our website. And also in the comments section, if there's some of our products or techniques you'd like to hear more about, please do let us know and we'll try to accommodate. Thank you.